Do you hear the people sing? Hello and welcome to the China Podcast. This episode is going out to you on the last day of April. We're all on holiday now, at least for a few days. Hold up now, let me retract that statement. Not all of us, but many, nevertheless. It's the Labor Day holiday. Labor Day in China officially falling on May 1st every year. That's tomorrow.
Yeah.
Eoin, any plans, any excursions outside the city lined up?
Well, we've got 5 days off, including today, so
Yeah.
4 days off. I've one or two things that I've been looking to do. It all depends on the weather, and it does.
Of course, as
and
ever,
it,
yeah.
And it depends on COVID as well.
More importantly,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean,
Well, I keep getting these messages to go and get my third jab as well. So I have to get out of Chongqing City and get to Guangzhou to get my jab.
Okay.
So that has to happen at some point. But I have to
That'll have to be done.
But I have to do the COVID test to get to the place to get the injection and then get a COVID test to come back.
Yeah, it's all a rigmarole.
Isn't it?
And that is the thing. We are limited in what we can do and how far we can travel.
Well, we can go a hell of a lot further than somebody in Shanghai. In Shanghai,
Yeah.
we're lucky that we can go outside of our own volition. You know, I can take a step outside and just go get some fresh air.
Yeah, like we may be confined to Chongqing, the province, but there's 26 million people in Shanghai confined to their apartments.
Literally. And it's Shanghai that we want to completely focus on this week because a lot has gone on, a lot has gone down in the 3 weeks since we last spoke about it.
Yeah, I mean, the shit has hit the fan in that time.
Yep.
There was so much uncertainty in Shanghai when we last discussed it. It was only really kicking off. But the situation since then has escalated to titanic proportions.
And it's an unstable situation as well. I mean, it makes the Wuhan lockdown 2 years ago seem relatively straightforward. The Wuhan lockdown, which was the first lockdown in the place where the virus originated.
First lockdown anywhere, I would say.
First lockdown anywhere. That was 76 days. Now, for the people in Shanghai, they've already been there for 30, 40 days. And, you know, so it's half of the time in the Wuhan lockdown they've spent locked inside, and they've getting little to no opportunities to just open the door and go for a wander. If you give it another month, then that'll be the same length of time as the longest lockdown. And right now there is no end in sight.
There are a number of factors which make the lockdown situation in Shanghai that much worse, or at least seem much worse. And we'll get into them in more detail as we go, but mainly the whole ordeal was mismanaged by the city authorities, which resulted in the poor circulation of food deliveries, sporadic testing, a lack of proper quarantine facilities. Yep. And there are some now who will argue against that point, but I mean, disused schools and cramped office space just don't cut it.
Yeah, they're not quarantine facilities. Like, that just takes the piss.
It absolutely does. Now, we only tiptoed around these issues in the last episode, but we're going to look into the bones of what has actually been going on in Shanghai, and without wanting really to speculate or project our own bias too much.
Yeah, and that's hard. That is hard to do.
It is.
But we're going to try our best to keep it as balanced as we can. We've got the facts. They've all been sourced from social media in the form of visual documentation, first-hand accounts from the perspective of Shanghai netizens, and the people who are living in this never-ending nightmare, shall we say.
Yes. In our last episode, we spoke mostly about the lack of food distribution in many areas of Shanghai. We spoke about the bartering, the community togetherness, and that is people, you know, trying to make the most of a bad situation. So how's that going? Like, generally speaking, a lot better. Let's be truthful, it is.
Yeah.
There are probably still a few fuck-ups here and there, but people for the most part are getting their food boxes delivered more regularly. Actually, on Owen, do you remember hampers being a thing in Ireland?
Yeah.
We're talking like, especially in the form of raffle prizes, like for Christmas or Easter or other such festivities. And that came to me just now when I thought of these. God knows how many food boxes that are going around Shanghai every day.
Really, they remind you of like the hampers that you used to see in the shop front.
They take me back, but it was a happier scenario. Not like now.
They were a big thing in Ireland. I can't speak for other countries because, of course, I only grew up in Ireland. But yeah, I do. I remember they'd be packed with things like cheeses and crackers and jars of chutney and other such fineries. Because you might not normally get the jar of chutney.
No.
They were
you'd need a few extra euro in your pocket.
You'd need a couple of euro in your pocket.
Or pound, depending on how many years ago it was.
Yeah. And these food products, they'd all be sitting embedded in straw and wrapped with like fancy plastic just to give it a better effect. But I imagine that's a far cry from the food parcels we've seen in Shanghai.
Well, mostly the food is delivered in good condition. The boxes, they're well sealed, they're well presentable when they get dropped off at the door. Or rather,
they look alright.
The outside gate, not really the door. Someone has to take them in. But at the same time, we have seen food boxes, the contents of which have been smashed, fruit or vegetables gone rotten, meat too, for that matter, or foods that are just simply sogging wet because they've been left out under the rain all day, and not collected at the gate by the Da boys for reasons unknown.
Yeah, and more on the Da boys later. But first, let's consider what Shanghai represents to a global audience. First of all, it's highly developed. It's a futuristic city. It's a major player in the financial world. It hosts major sporting events, and it's a huge draw for foreign talent and investors and companies who want to establish in China. As an outsider, when you think of what a modern day Chinese city skyline looks like, you instantly think of Shanghai. It has a similar sort of an aura to like the Manhattan skyline. It's
very much so. Yeah,
it's very distinct, and it's kind of inspiring. But that Shanghai is that inspirational Shanghai is kind of, the aura of it is kind of fading somewhat in recent weeks with these events. Shanghai has become a city in which the local economy has just came to a standstill, where people are confined to their homes and relying on food rations provided to them by their communities and the government. Medicine is in short supply. Parents have been separated from their children. There was one instance where people were removed from their rented homes because the buildings were going to be turned into a quarantine refuge or a quarantine centre. And these things have all happened, and any inkling of independence has ceased to exist. Shanghai, once a proud city, proud optimistic city, is quickly running out of optimism. It's kind of running out of energy.
But not running out of voice.
No.
In the early hours of April 14th, Chinese netizens on the social media platform Weibo seized a window of opportunity to unleash their wrath on how the lockdown was handled, in addition to other social issues, of course. What they did was to occupy the hashtag US is the biggest country of human rights deficit. And they did this so that they could vent their anger at the state. This hashtag about America is such an example where the foreign country in question was used to deflect from the growing crisis at home. And people were fed up of this. Many comments were delivered sarcastically, where users would intentionally replace the word China with the US so as to avoid the censors.
Which is a clever way of getting around them.
It really was, yeah. And Other criticism drew on either past or ongoing domestic issues, such as the demanding 996 work culture. That is, where people in certain sectors work from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. Others brought up high housing prices, recent scandals, and more.
Yeah, they were basically laying it all out at the doorstep and then just letting them have it.
Which is an interesting change in attitude, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this is new, or at least it's one of the very rare occasions where I've come across anything like this.
And there were others too who didn't shy away from being more direct, blasting state media for always banging on about what's happening abroad while ignoring local problems.
Yeah, it sounds like a movement based on solidarity, which is in stark contrast to 2 years ago. You see, what the Chinese people value above all else is safety and security. So the immediate response to the COVID outbreak in 2020, it gained widespread support because people were united, and rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, Wuhan, when it got locked down, nobody seemed to disagree.
Nobody did disagree. Everybody agreed. And nobody disagreed. Nobody needed convincing to wear a face mask.
Yeah, it was just something you did. The COVID response of 2020, it was a huge PR win for Beijing. Why? Because people were protected.
Yeah, and this time around, it's different. People are claiming that the government is overreacting to what is a milder strain of the disease.
Yeah, more infectious, but ultimately it's milder. And this all takes us to April 23rd, when a short film entitled Voices of April, documenting the sound bites of Shanghai's lockdown, it was released across various Chinese social media platforms. What took place was effectively a virtual battle between netizens and the censors. The video was repeatedly saved and distributed as a form of protest. Such persistence and resistance in mainland China hadn't been seen in such a long time, according to one social media user. The video captured voices of frustration, pleas for help, truth and lies, as well as moments of empathy and despair. It was quite a harrowing watch, and I think it's worth highlighting some of what was said. So let's start with the very first day of April.
Yeah, so this is a call between the Pudong CDC director and a resident, in which the latter was told that there were no ambulances and no vacancies at hospitals, and people were encouraged not to complain to the authorities.
April 2nd, truck drivers delivering essential supplies couldn't find any authorities to respond to, having gone the entire day without water to drink.
April the 3rd, a residential committee member asked for some guidance on the current policy from higher authorities.
April 6th, a corgi was beaten to death by a dabai as its owner was being transferred to a centralised quarantine centre, having tested positive.
And April 7th, an account of kind police officers helping to deliver food in one neighbourhood.
Also April 7th, a resident's father was denied medical treatment. The voice declares, "You were also brought into the world by your parents. Look at yourself. Is this something that human beings would do?"
April the 8th, a cancer patient who had just completed their chemotherapy wasn't allowed to enter their own compound.
The same day, Songjiang district, shouts of "distribute supplies, distribute supplies, distribute supplies."
Still the same day, one man went out of his way to bring food to a contractor who was trapped in the building that he was working on. The man said, "At first I was afraid of the virus. Then I thought viruses won't kill you, but hunger will kill me."
And that's actually a thing, by the way. People are more afraid of being sent to a quarantine camp than of the virus itself, which leads us to the next day, April 9th. People were forcibly transferred to a centralised quarantine centre that wasn't even built. They had to scramble and fight each other for food and bedding. Most people, in particular the elderly, couldn't get any.
And this emphasised yet again another feat of solidarity. The censors simply couldn't keep up with the millions upon millions of video shares highlighting the misery of Shanghai residents. So many of them were at breaking point.
And many have united behind the song "Do You Hear the People Sing" from the Les Miserables musical. There was a video of someone playing it on the trombone out the window of their apartment.
Yeah, clearly some people are not controlling their soul's desire for freedom well enough.
No, they're not, no.
Where's that drone with the loudspeaker when we need it?
Yeah, where is that drone? Bring it back. Bring that drone back.
I imagine it's still flying around.
Oh,
Control.
The impotence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this particular individual, he was playing it on his or her trombone in fits and starts, while some neighbours decided to spontaneously join in by whistling along.
Yeah. There was one guy too that was praised on WeChat for having shouted out of his window at visiting party officials, letting them know that the people in his building were unable to get food and weren't being told what was going on. Here was one individual speaking up on behalf of an entire community. It hasn't all been civil though within some communities. Hearing of a positive case nearby instills fear in people. And if you're in a building where somebody tests positive, that's an automatic 14 more days of isolation and multiple PCR tests added on top of your current stint, which is what happened to me 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I've got an extra 2 weeks because of a guy on the 4th floor.
Yeah, and I imagine that's not nice.
No.
Especially when you're anticipating getting out, getting out for a walk, looking forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then, let's do it all again.
Let's do it all again, yeah.
Besides the usual squabbles you'd expect over what food is deemed as essential and non-essential, there have been reports of neighbours denouncing each other in public forums over things like someone not going for their PCR test or someone else trying to sneak out for food. There have been cases of residents calling the police because they saw someone outside their apartment in the corridor or witnessed people conversing in groups.
Yeah. All of this bears an uncanny resemblance between the whole positive, suspicious of now and the intellectual bourgeois of the 1960s during the Cultural Revolution. Come here. Speaking of non-essential produce, didn't one foreign guy order multiple cases of water for his compound only to be told that he wasn't allowed to order water again as it was deemed non-essential?
That happened, yes.
Now, think about this for a fucking second. Right. Essential, non-essential. Water labelled as non-essential. Fucking hell.
It's crazy.
It's insane.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, there has been more than one case of bizarre happenings, like from the quirky to the downright just mind-blowing, like with the water. There was a screenshot posted somewhere of a message addressed to one residential area reminding people to limit their intake, as in eating less, so that they could limit their outtake.
Shitting less.
Indeed. And this and this is all because the usual community operations, like the general maintenance of things, it has all come, or had all come at least, to a halt, to a standstill at that point.
Yeah, you need to get a black market plumber in if you take a particularly large dump. But yeah, another one is the black markets and the stealth markets.
Yeah.
Now, WeChat buying groups have become one of the best ways to get your food quicker.
Yeah.
You pay in advance and you get your food later. But if you're really stuck and you need to have something immediately, you might have to pay through the nose. And this is through black markets, essentially, which are operating out of people's apartments. If you want Coke, it's sold at twice the price, and dried mangoes, 3 or 4 times the original value.
That's Coca-Cola, yeah?
Coca-Cola.
Not the other stuff.
Not the other stuff.
Okay.
Can't get that. You get shot for that.
Yeah, but it's something that might be acquired through the black market.
It might be.
You know, just checking, just make sure
Yeah. Well,
that it was Coca-Cola.
I've yet to see it in China. I swear to God.
You never will.
Never will.
You never will.
Yeah.
And the stealth markets are for those who've done their time at home and they're allowed out on the street. But there have been photos of shop owners lifting up the shutters of their stores by a foot or two off the ground in the dead of night and selling whatever produce, mainly fruit and vegetables, just simple stuff, that they have packed on the floor inside.
Yeah.
It's like they're reaching under the shutter,
Reaching under the
pulling out whatever someone needs,
Yeah.
and that someone just bags it and runs.
I've seen it. Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah.
And that shutter, just up and down.
Up and down.
Quick. You get a 5-minute window probably.
Yeah,
That's it.
it's a
There's
little-
no one on the street.
No one on the street.
It's
Knock
2
on the
a.m.,
shutter,
3 a.m. in the
door
morning.
goes up, and then all of a sudden you have a banana.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the truth, though. Like,
And you're happy as Larry
Yeah.
with your banana.
oh yeah, you're gonna make a smoothie if you can get some milk. Yeah, but I hope the dad boys don't catch them doing that sort of stuff.
Yes, yeah, the Da Boys, or the Big Whites, as they're called in China, named after a character in Disney's Big Hero 6 film. But who are they? Who are the Da Boys, and how much manpower is required to manage Shanghai? Da Boys are those people that you see dressed in the full white hazmat suit and all the gear. They can be seen at outdoor testing facilities. They can be seen sleeping under pavilions in the
I've
rain,
seen that, yeah.
playing on their phones because there's nothing else going on, or just walking about annoying people, ordering them around with their loudspeakers.
Did you see them? I didn't. I have to send you this video. There was a little bit of a wind storm, a little bit of a tropical storm in Shanghai,
Oh yeah, all the pavilions just blew
and all
away.
the pavilions just blew away, and you could see all the dad boys just trying to hold on to this testing centre outside of some community.
Yeah,
And no, the wind was too strong; it just flew away.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the loudspeakers. This has to be a skit.
Yeah.
I think this has got to be bored Da Boys, right?
Yeah.
But there was a chicken.
I love it already.
There was a chicken on the road,
Yeah.
and a Da Boy went over to the chicken with the loudspeaker to tell
Yeah.
it to kind of move on. No loitering.
No loitering.
Had to be a skit.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just it has to be a skit.
Has to.
But the Da Boys, like they're not seen by Shanghai residents in the same heroic light as those frontline workers of 2 years ago in Wuhan. They're very much despised because of what they've now come to represent.
Yeah. So many dabais are made up of migrant workers. They're rural migrants who've been hired by agencies dealing with COVID control. This, by the way, is the only real sector that's growing in China these days. They number in their tens of thousands. They travel the length and breadth of the country as health workers with the tasks of periodically enforcing lockdowns, staffing isolation wards, state isolation wards, and running mass testing campaigns. For decades, China's economy has relied on migrant workers, or the country's floating population, as they're known to Chinese policymakers. There are some 300 million of them who drift from city to city in search of work, ranging from construction to factory assembly, even food delivery and things like that. These are the people who have assembled all your smartphones and built China's most stunning skyscrapers.
But due to the economic downturn of the last 2 years, these migrant workers have joined the ranks of the Dabai. They are usually trained by other volunteers, usually people not overly familiar with the procedures involved. And as we said, tens of thousands of these workers are essential to implementing COVID policy. They float from lockdown to lockdown, filling the vacancy wherever needed. This sporadic, sometimes hazardous work leaves them vulnerable to avaricious employment agencies. Although they enjoy few legal protections and whatnot, they often have few other employment opportunities, especially now with lockdowns having been imposed in one shape or another in 45 Chinese cities as we speak.
Yeah, 45, yeah. And because of China's ongoing strict pandemic measures, anyone associated with COVID prevention work literally becomes untouchable. After weeks on the job, they're kept apart in quarantine for at least 2 more weeks, and if they're lucky, they'll get paid for the privilege once the job expires.
Did you see that video of the huge group of them set to the Star Wars Stormtroopers music?
I wish I had.
Yeah, someone a few stories up in their building is filming as the gates of a compound are opened, and you see what must be 100 of these big whites that come marching in to the residential area in their full gear, and then you hear the do 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 that music from Star Wars, which is just meant to strike fear into you. It's hilarious.
I want people to think of Squid Games for a minute, like, you know, the Korean mystery drama that everyone went wild for when it was released. If you've seen it, you'll remember the large room in which the contestants, they sleep with the pale, bright factory floor lights, which are kept turned on until bedtime. This hangar-like space is echoed in some of these quarantine facilities. This is
except the lights in this case are left on 24/7.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's like torture. It is.
Yeah, I wouldn't sleep. I wouldn't be.
They did some research into leaving a light on for 24 hours.
What it would do to your brain.
What it would do to your brain. It's then, lads, nuts.
Yeah, imagine 2 weeks of that.
Yeah, can you imagine
or
it?
longer.
Can you imagine it? And these lights are left on, and these facilities are gigantic spaces that, you know, can house 2,000 people with, you know, a couple of toilets.
Or Portaloos for that festival experience.
Oh yeah, they are horrible places. Festival Portaloos. Yeah.
And more isolation facilities have been ordered for construction right across the country. What does that tell you about the future of dynamic zero COVID?
It tells me that they're not going to shift from the policy anytime soon.
Which is interesting because almost every other country in Southeast Asia has eased their restrictions to the point where things are becoming more normal. Vietnam has moved away from the zero COVID. Thailand is reopening. India too.
And sure, they were in the shits for a long time too.
Yeah, India was getting it terrible. And now Taiwan is on the brink of reopening. They are transitioning from zero COVID to accepting how to live with the virus.
Yeah.
This decision has been backed by a high vaccination rate and has been promoted by government as the new Taiwan model. The Taiwan Premier, Su Tseng-chang, has assured the populace that they will not shut down the economy, unlike in Shanghai.
Yeah, and this is despite dealing with a surge in local cases since the beginning of the year. Taiwan has had over 18,000 cases since the 1st of January in a population of 23 million people. Those numbers are comparable to Shanghai. Now, Su said that more vaccines and rapid antigen testing has been ordered to help Taiwan cope with the uptick in infections so that they're prepared to adequately reopen gradually, while reducing the amount of time those with COVID or their contacts have to spend in quarantine.
Yeah, and the government has already cut the quarantine for all arrivals to Taiwan from 2 weeks to 10 days. And it's even looking into further reducing that time frame. This decision by Taiwan leaves China, including Hong Kong, as the only major economy still sticking to the zero COVID strategy. even as Omicron dismantles those defences. It's as if the Communist Party have pinned their colours to the zero COVID mast, and they're not retreating, they're not budging.
Yeah, that's what Xi Jinping...
No matter what happens.
No matter what happens, no retreat, no surrender. They've made the decision, and that's what they're going to do. And Xi Jinping, he said as much recently, despite medical experts coming out and suggesting alternatives and questioning the legitimacy behind the continual pursuit of the zero COVID policy.
So, where do we stand now? Shanghai is a city of positives and negatives, the haves and the have-nots, those who have tested positive for COVID and those who haven't. The lockdown has reduced Shanghai residents to those two labels. These people are going through a once-in-a-lifetime experience centred around planned provision, a barter economy, starvation in extreme cases, wartime anxiety, and just so much uncertainty. Citizens have begun questioning how their beloved city has fallen from grace in the blink of an eye amongst such anguish. Anger and frustrations spill over onto social media, with articles and videos being shared millions of times over before being brutally deleted by censors. Two things have happened in the past week. The first is that more and more people have been allowed to leave their apartments, but usually not permitted to go that far, or told to remain within the boundaries of their compounds. And this is usually the case. On the other hand, and this is the second thing, many areas of the city are enduring worsening conditions, as they are literally caged into their buildings by green fencing that is being erected across the city. It's surreal.
Yeah, it is. And now Beijing could be facing the prospect of a similar lockdown. Every school has closed, and the people are emptying the supermarkets of all food, in the dreaded anticipation of a lockdown. And this is the essence of living in China. It's a feeling that's new and a feeling that's old. That being the constant anxiety of huge, abrupt changes to society that are so completely beyond individual control. There have been minor confrontations between ordinary people and the authorities, but ultimately, most have now resigned themselves to the fact that they're getting caught up in this for the long haul.
You know, we were drinking in our local bar a few weekends back, if you remember, and the Australian Formula 1 Grand Prix was on the telly. It was coming from Melbourne, having been cancelled the previous 2 years.
Yeah.
And that particular weekend was record-breaking in terms of sport in the city.
Yeah.
The place was hopping. People were enjoying themselves. They were having a celebration of sorts. And the Aussie Rules was on as well.
Yeah, 94,000
same weekend.
94,000 people watched that game.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. But, you know, I was watching all this, and the first thing that struck me, like that there wasn't a single face mask in sight.
No.
Amongst all these people. And, you know, the Formula 1 brings 200,000 people. Right?
Yeah.
Not a single person has a face mask. It's as if people have moved on. They've been vaccinated. Some of them have even received their boosters.
Yeah.
Some of them are probably waiting for another booster.
Yeah.
They don't want to remain stuck in a never-ending, depressing cycle.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. And those scenes in Melbourne, because in our local bar, there were multiple TVs and on sport on all the TVs, and everything was in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Everything was in Melbourne.
Yeah,
it was
the
weird.
Aussie Rules on one TV, the F1 was on the other.
And those scenes, they were just completely at odds to Shanghai and other cities in China.
Yeah.
There was an optimism, or more of a release of joy, that said, we've put this behind us and we want to go on living. It was really nice to see, actually. And it does give me hope that even here in China the situation will improve.
Yeah, we can only watch this space.
Yeah.
That's what we can hope for.
That's what we can hope for.
At best.
Yeah.
let's call that a wrap.
Yeah.
I know this episode was, quite heavy going, but we felt this is relevant to now.
But sometimes something pops up and we have to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Because there's 26 million people locked in their houses.
Yeah.
And we would be remiss if we didn't. And there's not a lot of ways to put a nice spin on it, because it's not enjoyable. You know what I mean? But we have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's something that people want to hear about. It's something that people want to know about, want us to do all this sort of, to tell you about this sort of stuff.
Absolutely. So with that, thank you as ever for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Toodles.